Hello, everybody. Good afternoon for all of us watching our first session from DRBF LATAM Awareness Program with AACE Brazil. Today we'll be speaking with two panelists, Gad and Ricardo Medina Sala. And our subject today is DRB Arrangement on Public-Private Partnerships Projects in the USA. Gada had done a very good study regarding DRBF in the United States in those P3 projects, and she will show us what her finds, what are the proposal of her research, and Ricardo is trying to mirror what's happening here in Latin America regarding this subject, especially in P3, and the special conditions here in Brazil and Latin America regarding dispute boards, how it's going on here. Probably it's not so broad as in the United States, but we're trying to begin to implement those practices here in Brazil, besides mitigations, arbitration, and other resolution, conflict resolution options. So, welcome, Gadan, your presentation for us. And here in Brazil, Latin America, probably, as I saw in my LinkedIn link, many people from all over the world, they are interested in this subject. Welcome.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Ricardo. So, hi, everyone. Just a quick one on me here. I'm very thrilled and happy to be part of this very distinguished group, and very happy to speak to you about the work that we completed with DRBF. Probably it's been a while now, it just time flies. So I'm just gonna go ahead and talk a little bit about it. Just some background, I'm an associate professor at California State University, Pomona, and I'm in construction engineering and management. I completed my PhD at Iowa State University, and it was also in contracts, specifically on dispute resolution methods. So that's where, I wouldn't say that's where I started my passion was dispute resolution, because prior to that, I also used to work for a Bechtel subsidiary where I used to work in contract administration and procurement. So, so it has been a nice route overall, and I think this study has been very exciting. I also want to give credit to the entire committee that helped out with this study, as well as the student who actually conducted the study from Cal Poly Pomona. So, so Ricardo, why don't we just like sort of swing through it, and I'm gonna just share maybe my slides, and I'm gonna stop at maybe every slide, and you could chime in, because I'd love to hear from your own personal experiences at how we could map what's happening in the U.S. As well. So.
Let's do that, Gada. Thank you very much for the flexibility of doing that. Of course, you know, I could weigh in anytime I find something that has some sort of match with us here.
Of course, yeah. So let me go, and I'm going to share my screen in a second if you guys don't mind. And right, so a quick one. So I'm glad Anne is here as well. But basically, when this project started, it really started out of an initiative from DRBF to investigate how P3s could be used on how DRBs actually could be used on P3 projects. So I'd like to actually thank Anne, and who's here on the call. I'd like to thank Kurt and Linda Conrad, who's helped us lead us. And of course, there were many DRB P3 task force members from Region 1 US and Canada, and actually other regions who actually contributed to the findings of the study. So let's jump in. So I don't know, I mean, if this is something we could get from the chat, Andre, as well, is how familiar are our audience with the idea of the use of DRB on P3s, or how experienced, or what type of experience have you had with P3s? I think this is going to also add to the interest to the topic of discussion here. But as you can see, when we're talking about a P3 structure, we're talking about a public-private partnership. it is a pretty complicated structure, and I'm sure Ricardo can chime in about how complicated it is in terms of the parties involved. So we're not talking a regular design bid build traditional project where you have an owner, contractor, and owner designer. You're talking about a lot of lines here, and each of these lines is a contract of its own, in which you have contractual agreements and maybe sometimes pass-throughs and a lot of sort of complicated issues that create a lot of frictions. Ricardo, what do you think about this chart? Does it really resonate with what you're seeing? Is your end as well? I think you're muted, probably.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Yeah.
All right. That's pretty much it. I mean, the design is pretty much it. It's, of course, there will be changes in policies and regulations, but I think we can start from that. And I agree with you that friction is all about friction here. And one thing that from your first chart that brings my attention is, how do we manage to insert dispute boards inside this drawing right here? Because as you said, it's not a simple construction contract where you have two parties, well-defined poles there, and how you define responsibilities between them and how you follow on with them. And PPP, it takes much more time than construction projects. So we're talking about 30 years, for example. Construction is what, 4 years perhaps? If it's really, really long, we're talking about 6 years, 7 years maybe. So it differs right there.
Yeah. And this is really where we're like, you're hitting it right on where I'm heading. So thank you for that. So yeah, these things, they're supposed to light, but they're not. But it's basically showing you the friction points there. So this is the question you're asking exactly, and I think this was the question that drove the entire study, is where should we have these dispute boards sit, right? There are many options that you can have them sit, whether it's between the public owner and the concessionaire as a single DRB, or would you like to have actually 3 DRBs between the owner and the concessionaire, another one between this concessionaire design builder, and a third one between the concessionaire and O&M, just to add to the fun? Or would you like to have an entire DB omnibus, right? So what is really, like, what are these factors that would let us decide which way we should go? Like, and that is of its own a question that needs to be sort of addressed. So just to give you an idea about how it is viewed from the US perspective, they're viewed as being like, and this is based mostly on I would say literature, also anecdotal information from people with experience on P3 projects and whatnot. It is seen as DRB is very well suited in alternative project delivery methods overall, and specifically on P3s, you could see that you could actually elevate many problems that can happen upfront. So you can foresee situations, which there are many, as Ricardo just mentioned. The P3 structure is really complicated. You could have a positive impact on renegotiations, because there's a lot of negotiations happening on these P3 projects as well. You can maintain an open and trusting relationship. And of course, I don't want to really hear what they say, preach to the quarry, because technically we all sort of are understanding that at the end of the day, DBs are going to offer a less expensive and solution to dispute resolution compared to if you want to move to something like litigation, arbitration, mediation. And Ricardo, please chime in. I mean,
yeah, I was trying to follow you here, because I totally agree with you. And dispute boards in Brazil, they are kind of new. We've been doing this for a while, not so long. We have new regulations here about dispute boards. Actually, they were kind of criticized when we started regulating on dispute boards, because folks here understood that dispute boards is just it's the will of the party's will. So you shouldn't really put a cast on it. Just let it flow. But the fact is, before we had regulations in Brazil, we didn't really have dispute boards at all. So, well, everything I'm saying here is because when you bring the idea of arbitration and litigation and mediation, there's always, a huge confusion here. When people actually will understand that perhaps is dispute boards arbitration, is it mediation? So we need to start clarifications right there. And since it's a new thing, and uh, and I did have another comment, but perhaps you can add, and I'll get back to you as soon as I remember it.
No, sure. Yeah, and I agree with you. It is actually relatively here, I personally see how it's sort of ballooning in terms of use, specifically on alternative project delivery, or even in the standard specs of some of the various or public agencies. So it is ballooning on its own. So that is definitely something that we're seeing. And in P3 projects on its own is something that is like is a whole topic of its own. That's probably going to we need another 2 or 3 webinars to talk about. But the idea of the use of DRBs on P3s of its own is very exciting, because it does, as we said, add to that dimension of early sort of, I would say, maybe not the very most technical world, but early resolution, early avoidance of disputes before they even become a dispute. So now we look through, so with that drive in mind, and with that thought in mind, we basically started looking at the research to see, okay, so has anyone really touched on how we could arrange those DRBs on a P3 project? Has someone addressed it? Was there any research or body of study out there? And from our research that was conducted as a master's project here at Cal Poly Pomona, it was evident that there was a gap in knowledge about where should we put these DRBs and what is most effective per se to do. So that's really,
Gada,
Ricardo,
would you mind if I interrupt you?
Of course, please feel free to interrupt any point.
Okay, thank you, because I did remember what I had to say, and it has to do with what you were saying right now. Since it's a complex situation of contracts, what we have here in PPPs, I'm not even sure if only DBs would be the only or the better or the most suitable mechanism to be implemented. Perhaps it should work together with arbitration and other sorts of methods. But we do have a difficulty here in Brazil, because, and of course, we're talking about public contracts. So we need to be very strict in terms of legality. Legality is the principle of legality we have here. So we're very strict. We cannot do anything besides what the law allows you to when you're a public agent. So does law allow us to do all those, mix and match of mechanism? How are we going to implement them? And we found, dispute boards is something that people are talking about. It's something new, something, this can work. And perhaps they were so emphatic about it that in one PPP project in São Paulo here, we noticed that they kind of made mediation DB and arbitration clause, and it was kind of difficult to understand, because if you had a DB installed and they were following the contract, they knew the parties. When something came up, you couldn't go right away to the dispute board. You wouldn't have to start mediation before. So how does it work? Perhaps we need to sit down and see if, how we can manage all those sorts of methods before just jump in and start doing the business, right?
I totally can resonate with what you're saying, Ricardo. In fact, we, as a follow-up to this study, we started actually another study also with Kurt Duttman at DRBF, and we are now looking at the overall dispute resolution process. And it has been very interesting to see that DBs would be the second step in an escalation ladder, pretty much, because you would believe that it's pretty much that the DBs are involved throughout the process of the project, attending frequent meetings as the dispute is bubbling up, it's happening. But we've seen it in some agencies where it's actually being implemented more of as an arbitration per se, but an internal arbitration, in which basically what happens is that disputes are brought up to the DB when they become an actual disagreement and a big thing. So even the idea, I totally agree with you. I think the step here of our study was, it's as if we had already established that the DBs are a good way to go for P3s, but technically, yes, there is some way that we need to pave still to get to that point where we understand really how DBs are being used on public projects. And the legality part of the story is a huge thing as well, because for example, public agencies in the US usually follow the standard specifications or the codes or whatever is out there or the legislation. But at the end of the day, each state is its own thing. So that's another added sort of dimension that needs to be addressed within the selection of the DB, if DB is even an option to be considered. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you for adding that. And so so basically I'm just reminding us of where the problem stands and as far as this study, but I mean we could go, please feel free to ask questions as well around these aspects, because the idea was in this focus was where should the DB stand and where they're going to be most effective, but we could go back to the fundamental understanding of DB on its own, right? So I just want to present here the quick DRB models that were actually part of sort of the initiation of the study when we started. Was there are certain ways in which we could place the DBs, and I'm just gonna, these are pretty much what you see here in the brackets here, the DB, right? So the first one is model 1, which later on in the study, you guys are gonna see that it sort of is the most common one used in the US, in which you have in a P3 structure, the DB sitting between the owner and the project company or the special vehicle or basically the concessionaire, whatever we would like to call it. And so it's just one single DB with a standing invitation, of course, to the owner or to the O&M, I mean, and to the design build team to attend these meetings if needed based on the topics being discussed. The second one, and I'm going to really go fast and then we could discuss it a little bit further. The second one is the 3 separate DBs that I had referred to earlier in the very big slide, where you would have a DB that is interested pretty much in like is serving in this situation owner project company or owner concessionaire, and then another one that serves the concessionaire and the O&M, and then a third one that serves the concessionaire and the design build. And I want to hint that this is not really what is being used in the US. These were propositions that we made in the study so that we would see what would be best suited based on various factors that we're going to consider later. But technically what is most used in the US would be that model 1 that I am showing down here in the first slide. Is this the same model that you have experienced, Ricardo, like the one on the top level?
I really wish I could have that much of experience that you guys do have there. But if I had to say something, is most of the DBs here, they are implemented between owners and contractors. PPPs here, not only PPPs are kind of new, but they, of course, we do have service public that are rendered and supplied by private parties, but not really on PPP's regulations. And PPPs only start in the beginning of 2000. And so I'm not even considering that. I'm trying to tackle now the drawing you have here on in the screen. And I would say, we are more likely to have, hold on, let me see if I can see here, because a single DB here. We're more likely to have those.
Yeah, and I wouldn't claim we're way advanced, to be honest. I mean, if we compare us to the other parts of the world where P3 has been implemented for many years compared to us, even, I would say we're not the super advanced in P3s as other areas.
And you know what? And I'm telling you, we were likely according to the law we are trying to implement here. This would be the perhaps the prevailing one. But right now, what we have is the second possibility here is the concessionaire. When they go ahead and hire contractors in general, they just may implement
a single DB.
One thing that is nice that is happening is it's just private DBs. They have nothing to do with public a public partnership or concession service of any kind.
What are private DBs, Ricardo? What are
Yeah,
these?
when I call private DBs is on private contracts.
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
when they're not related to public service of any kind.
Ricardo, just to mention, as I spoke yesterday about the new law of tenders and administrative contracts, the new law that will start right now. We spoke that there's no normative treatment so well established in
Mhm.
the new law.
Mm.
I think it's important to mention this to the public that is watching our panel regarding this.
Mhm.
What there is something gray area, still have a gray area
Yes,
regarding the dispute boards.
Mhm,
I agree with you, Andre, because what we have here, we have um, uh, a PPP law that is just a simple law. It's one act, and we have the public procurement law, which is a different law, but tends to be the most important one. And it's a
mhm,
new law here. And this new law brings the possibility of the public party to hire dispute boards. But it's just one article saying, okay, now you can use dispute boards. But in the Brazilian regulation in general, we do not find anything that says, okay, what is dispute board? What is a dispute board? So there's always a doubt, of course. We have doctrine and we've been implementing dispute boards here in Brazil. So, of course, we know what it is. But again, legality, right?
mhm,
Legality is the problem. Okay, we have the procurement law saying, okay, go ahead as a public administrator, you can do it. But when you have the control organisms in Brazil saying, I understand there's a law here saying it's an important law. It has an article saying that it can use dispute boards, but what is dispute boards? For
mhm,
the control organism, they are always asking, where's the real legality here? It should be first really well regulated. So we have projects still for the whole country. It's one project that is in our Congress is still waiting for approval. It hasn't been approved yet. But we do have some regional and localized acts or laws that will allow public administrator to do it with
mhm,
no problem whatsoever.
mhm.
You understand? So if you go to the state of São Paulo, in the city of São Paulo, okay, no problem. There's a law saying, okay, go ahead. If you go to the state of Rio Grande do Sul, same thing. Or even the city of Porto Alegre, no problem. Belo Horizonte, capital of Minas Gerais, go ahead, you have it, but not a general one for the whole country.
Mhm.
And just to mention that there are already two bills running in the Congress, one from the Chamber of Deputies and another one from the Federal Senate regarding these to regulate the installation of dispute board and continue administrative contracts entered by the union. And the change in the Federal Senate, the change there, the bill, the number 206 to the PL 2421, and they are broader, not just for
Yeah,
union, but all the
they were
states
put together.
yeah. I hope that's running since 2001, no, 2018, and now in 2021, they changed for the PL 2421, and now it's running in, I think it's public audition regarding this new law. I hope they
Yeah,
can
let's see.
run, they can run more quickly to have this decision, and because even the law says not exactly dispute board, that dispute resolution committee. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we don't call it dispute boards as we try to translate it. Yeah, it's pretty much it. It won't be much different.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it sounds, no, go ahead.
Was it clear? Sorry if it took too long, Gada.
Oh, no, it's actually very, very, very enlightening to learn about. And I think everyone is probably also it's very enlightening to learn about how the processes and the legality of the story is working as well in Brazil. As I mentioned, I think we could map it and say in the states, in various US states, depending on the local agencies, they have their own sort of standard specs to allow or to basically spell out. Now, there are always going to be sort of also within these public projects, sort of negotiations being conducted based on the project delivery method as well, to actually maybe change what the dispute resolution process is. So I know, for example, we were just speaking to a DOT a few days ago, and we were talking about the P3 project in which they chose to actually implement DBs on a different scale, in which they would have a technical DB and a commercial DB. So in that situation, they would handle different issues because it was really hard. And that's really the heart of the study here. It was really hard to get a single DB on a P3 project to be able to manage various dispute topics that could be very significantly different. Like a financial topic on a P3 project could be really, really complicated for an engineer to handle with no finance background. So yeah, so I think it really goes in our situation, or in the situations I've personally seen, I think it really goes down to the standards of the agency as well as maybe the project negotiations to a certain point in time. Yeah.
When you say single DB, you say a DB that is composed by only one member?
No, it
No,
actually
it's just
yeah.
one DB for. All right, I understand.
Yeah, it's confusing now that you say that, because it couldn't imply it's the DAB or something, but like a dispute education or no, but it's really, in that sense, it's really a DRB with 3 members, but it's just one. Versus my next slide, which actually shows 3. So it shows 3 separate DBs. So we have one here, one between the concessionaire provider, and a third one here. And this
can
is
I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you have a DB between owner and the concessionaire, how would you deal with the time of the contract? But because they're really long-term contracts, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think this is where we started to consider the other models where we could have actually different DABs handling different situations. Like, for example, with a very long contract, you would expect that that's where the O&M would lie. So maybe you would have a DB that would actually handle the concessionaire O&M situation. Or, and I'm just going to jump through the slides here so that I would show you the various ones, or you would have a single DB that actually handles the concessionaire and the design build and the O&M, or then you would have what was called in that situation omnibus, really, and this one is the one low tier, but what I was referring to was the last one here, which is really a single DB that handles the entire situation. So it would actually be extending in that situation during the course of the project, so it's reading the O&M. So yeah, it is one aspect of the study that we looked into, the O&M aspect of the story, whether it should be part of the DB or not. Model 5, and now that you're asking the question, was not really used in any of the cases we've seen. It was mostly model 1. So it was mostly that we've seen that the DB would sit on top, right? Not in to continue throughout the O&M. Even though it is one of the prepositions here that were made in the study and was tested. So yeah,
But still, I still have this question, because if you see, if it's the model 1 is the one that it was mostly used, how do you deal with the time? Because if it's a 30-year contract, can you hear me? There's a truck going on here.
I can. It's actually a very nice background that you have.
Yeah, I came to the southern of Brazil. It's where my wife's family lives. So sorry for that. It's great out, but
no, I can hear. I personally can't hear any background. You can hear me very well.
Okay, so the question is, if it's a 30-year contract, how would we expect that the same DB would survive 30 years to stay there in country? How would the parties have to live with them? They cannot see their faces anymore. So, you know what I'm saying? Or perhaps should we work on mandates, for example? Look, you're a DB member, you have you have a 3-year mandate. Perhaps it could be renewed for another 3-year period, but you're out right after that.
Yeah.
Did you work on this
No,
sort of
actually, Ricardo, I don't
dynamics?
think we did, and it really raises a very, very valid point. I think we did not actually get to the dynamics of how it's going to be like sort of how the contracts are going to be set up, how long are they going to be? Is it going to be a single person, or is it going to be a term for people and they actually sort of rotate? We did not get into that level, but I think that's a very, very valid question. I mean, definitely something that we should address really. In maybe in the future as we move on. I think the idea here was whether to test pretty much the validity of it even being an option or not, to have this sort of DB that sits at the bottom there between the O&M and the design build. And one of the very big challenges and barriers you already brought up is the time aspect of the story. How long are they going to be there? So it did not really this was not really addressed in this study. But yeah, so I don't want to really bore you with all the details of an academic, to be honest. So I'm actually I'm just gonna quickly sort of give you an idea of what was done, and I think the most exciting part is to see the case studies, at least and please chime in at any point. But the idea is that to see what is really happening versus like what are we, at the end of the day, I'll show you also our recommendations, but what is really happening. So there were multiple stages that we went through, starting from obviously looking into the documents and whatnot. And then from there, we actually opened up 10 projects, 10 P3 projects, and we looked into them to see what DBs are they using and sort of figure out which model are we talking about, if they're using even DRB, because some of them were not even using DRB, right? So it doesn't, back to your very, very valid point, who says that DRB is best suited to P3? That's even a question of its own. It's a whole research question that you could address, right? So that was one. The other thing was, of course, we had meetings with our DRBF committee. There was a questionnaire that was sent, focus groups were conducted, and then at the end of the day, we actually developed a tool, which is a sort of I would say it's in a testing stage. It's really a piloting tool that we are actually discussing with the DRBF committee right now, how we're going to use that tool to maybe inform and help the owners make decisions about where should this DRB sit. So I'm just going to run through this really fast, and I think I talked about all that, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But these are the projects we looked into. So these were the 10 projects. As you see, all of them are P3 projects. Some of them do have that operation part of it. Some of them do not. Only one does not have the finance part of the story. But they're mostly huge projects in terms of size, and that's where you see more P3 projects, right? So obviously, the dollar value does give an indication of how huge the projects are. So in these specific projects, what we did was we actually opened up the contract document and we looked through the dispute resolution methods article, and we started reading through it to see what the specifications call for. And this was a big table, and I don't assume that you guys are going to really read it here, but this was big table that basically looked, if you look up there, it's really looking into the project, what's the P3 type, what's the cost, who's the owner, and what is basically who is the concessionaire. So you could see the sort of the divisions of who the joint VJVs are. And then from there, we looked into the ladder of dispute resolution, which back to the very, very nice point you mentioned. So starting even from partnering, where we're partnering actually implemented, was there a senior personnel and each party that was designated, obviously like an internal process superseding even DBs. And then from there, we asked questions like, is there a DAB or a DRB? We see that on all P3 projects, actually, we don't see any arbitration, for example, being designated here. We see mediation, which is interesting, together with DRBs in some cases, right? So actually with DABs in some cases. And litigation, obviously, is the way to go if nothing works. And if it is non-binding, right? So if it's non-binding, we end up really with that litigation part of the story. So how does this resonate with the processes overall? And I wouldn't say P3s, to be honest, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the methods being used on projects in Brazil overall.
Mm-hmm. You know, I would love to. Sadly, in Brazil, we haven't really took the plunge like we haven't taken the plunge like you did. Uh, we're on it. We're making efforts to get there, but it's still not a very simple matter. Uh, Perhaps what I could mention, and I think this is pretty interesting, really, is that our infrastructure ministry. I'm really happy to say this. Really, they finally looked into the dispute boards with saying, look, this is a tool that we understand it's important and we need to use it. And so, and for the first time, it really happened. So what they did, and perhaps they didn't so well, but at least they did, is they asked their attorneys, internal attorneys, to uh, uh, to write a clause, if you will. It would be some sort of clause, a pattern clause, a standard clause of containing dispute board provisions, considering public for public procurement and PPPs. Okay,
Mhm.
but and what they did is that they released for public consultation, and everybody that would be interested could make their comments and send back to the ministry. And we stopped right there. I haven't heard anything because we had elections, and really tough elections, really, in the end of the year. Really sucked, big one. And but what I can say is after that, we don't really know how things are gonna be because there's a new president, there's a new government, and of course, new ministry. But you know what? I think that some of the works, especially this one, will be kept and it will be continued because PPPs is a reality in Brazil, and DBs are here to stay. So they sent this clause, and a few things that we can discuss that relate to everything that you've spoken until here. First, I think they're talking about Model 1 here. In that clause. When I see the clause they suggested, I see Model 1 going on. But as I said, when I looked at the clause, I started thinking about it and it's saying, okay, it's a continuous contract. That's understood. But it's a 30-year contract, for example. So how are we going to manage? If we're going to use DBs, how are we going to do that? Second, I understood they are more keen to consider dispute review boards or recommendation boards. They don't even mention disputed adjudication board. And for me, that's a huge problem because in the United States, I understand dispute review boards are, there's a majority you have there and they work because you simply respect what a DB says. And I don't see that happening so well here in Brazil. We need education. And we need education because the public administrators, the agents, they are always concerned in saying, look, I'm not sure if I can do this. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to sign it. So what I need is a decision to grant me the power to do this, or to grant me, so that will release me from the responsibility, if you will. So we need education. We need that. In Peru, for example, and this is working fine. Peru is a huge example. They do have education boards and they're doing well. We need that in Brazil. So this is the second problem. Third problem, when I see the clause in PPPs, I see that they try to make, and I'm not sure if they're gonna go that way. They try to make a restriction on the scope of the dispute boards, and this happens in the JRDs in Peru too. They're restricted to in Brazil. They are trying to restrict it to more technical issues rather than purely legal issues, and that confuses me very much. That confuses me. If you have a dispute board installed, man, those dudes are being paid to help people out. Use them. Use them. knock on their doors and say, look, this is a legal issue. Come give us a hand here. How would you decide on it? Or decide on it, please. If you don't agree with it, go to litigation, no problem, but solve the problem right away. It doesn't really matter if it's legal or if it's purely contractual, or even if it doesn't have anything to do with technical issues. So particularly those 3 points are something that are, concerning me a little bit, because the fourth one, and this is really bad, is something that concerns me, but this is more of a particularity that comes from Brazil, is public administration concerned about paying the dispute board. How would we pay the DB's fees? I might be mistaken, but I understand that the idea of public administration is to have the private party to pay it all. And that concerns me for a few reasons. Not only economically or financially, how we're going to manage. I mean, you can always put it on a budget, but you start creating a level of dependency. I think it's, this is something that concerns me a little bit. So perhaps we could discuss those issues, Gada. What do you think, Andrea, Gada?
I just want to hint on these are great points. One of the things that two of the things that you mentioned that resonate with me quite a bit is, and I don't think it's just a Brazil problem or it's just a concern. I think it's even the U.S. as well, because we hear owners speaking about that. And it's interesting because it's really controversial. The idea of the scope of the DB, is it supposed to be only focusing on the technical pieces, or is it supposed to get into the legal issues? And one of the owners that we had interviewed on some study, on one of the studies, had clearly mentioned that they were really not very happy. And not saying that this should be the case, but I'm just sort of conveying an opinion from an owner who's been using DBs, I would say, for a good 15, 20 years, is that they have been concerned that the DBs would sit in a position of an arbitrator rather than a DB, in which they actually start to make judgments and go cite the law, rather than try to avoid dispute and try to actually get solutions. They're actually citing what the law says and what the contract says, which is definitely a good point in terms of yeah, we need to know what the law says, what the contract says, but it's not that we're acting there as a sort of a judge. We're meant to be avoiding it. We're meant to be resolving it before it becomes a big deal. That was one of the interesting, I think, conversations we had with one of the owners. The other one about the payment aspect is also very interesting because another agency was referring to the idea that basically they have divided the payment between the public and private sector, because that's the norm here in the US. It's pretty much a division of the costs of the DB. And what they have observed is that the contractors, you said, were not really using it, and the DB is there, but they're not using it. So and obviously at that point in time, they're paid per meeting, they're paid hourly, whatnot. So they said, you know what, we're going to pay for it, but just use it. So, which was quite interesting in terms of like, okay, so the owner is paying for the entire DB, which is opposite of what you sort of said in terms of the private thing for the DB, right? So I think we're in a stage where we're sort of trying things out to see what's going to encourage people to actually use it properly, like from the agency's perspective. And I don't think they have any quantitative evidence to say that, but it's more of their empirical, sort of, not empirical, but more of like their own viewpoint, is that they see that this has increased participation because the contractor is now not paying for it and they're using it. And I'm like, okay, interesting. So Andre, please feel free to chime in as well.
Just to remind you that you have just 30 minutes to finish the panel.
Oh, darn.
Okay, I think there's a whole ecosystem for us to discuss many points, but I think it's important for the who watch our panel to they figure out what's their advantage of the dispute board regarding the other option. I see something like Most of the time they prevent escalation of conflict, the interruption or practicability of project execution, one of the advantages. Probably the other advantage is have members of the board to be familiar of the lawyer and engineer and technicians and legal aspects, and they probably will be helpful to do the execution of the and deliver of qualified decision also. And probably another one that's most of the time I spoke with regarding costs. Even today they are not very aware of other resolutions. They said arbitration is expensive, and I have some data here that, for example, the dispute board foundation show the cost of dispute resolved by dispute board is around 0.5% to 0.25% of the final cost of the work.
Mhm.
And you can see this corresponds a lot of expense compared, for example, for arbitration. So, and as you said, most of the time they share the cost of paying for the work performed by the board. That's right, or the number is not so well that, as I said.
Would you like to start, Gato?
No, go for it, Ricardo.
Well, for your first question, what are the advantages of dispute boards? Man, come on, man. We're talking here at DRBF event. Dispute boards, you're the best. That's what I have to say. And they do have great advantages, of course, especially when we're talking about contracts. There are continued contracts, and you know what? I think let me just say that advantages are great because you know they are the dispute boards. They follow the contract. They're always there. They can solve the problem right away. If it's not a decision, they can recommend. If they won't recommend, they can make us informal assistance. So it's like they're always ready to help. That's, you know, this is very important. And second of all, about the costs, you know what, big projects, you hire, you know, owners hire so important performance bonds. Why do they do that? Because they want to have their project done. And one way to assure that the project will be done with the least cost overrun, the least time overrun, is dispute boards. It's there, statistically proven. So do it, just do it. And in terms of costs, yes, I believe your numbers are fair. It's about that. That's pretty much it. And of course, the percentage will depend or will vary on the total cost of the project. If the project is huge, the percentage of the dispute board will be very small. If the project is not so big and you do install a standing dispute boards, then perhaps the percentage will be a bit bigger.
I just
What
want
do you say,
to.
Gato?
That's beautiful, Ricardo. I mean, yes, we're here talking about dispute boards, and I think it's sort of a, I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but it's a sort of a no-brainer that what we've seen in terms of adoption of the dispute boards in the US is a proof of its own that they're seeing value of why it's being used. Now, the one thing, the caveats that are happening very similar to any sort of technique or mechanism in the world is how are we actually implementing it? So when we start talking to owners and we start seeing owners using only DBs at the point where there is a dispute, you start wondering what was the whole point of having a DRB then, because the DRBs needs to be involved all throughout the process. I mean, throughout the project, they attend meetings, they're frequently there. When you start seeing owners actually paying for the DB so that they incentivize the contractor to actually use the DB, this means that maybe we're not really understanding what the DB is for. So I think there needs to be training there, because even one of the very, very interesting points that came up also from the owners were this sometimes you would hire the DB as an owner, you would pick your DB, and this is, I wouldn't say this is an individual problem. I would say this is a problem we should also sort of address one way or the other, is the qualifications of the DBs, right? Who's being actually on the board? Is there any conflict of interest? Have they done business with previous with the contractor or the owner before? Because this, for example, in one of the agencies we spoke to, this was one of the tremendous issues. It is how the selection of and the qualifications of the DB affected the process itself. So technically, in essence, the DB is like really a very strong process. I think what we need to more emphasize as I speak more to the owners and as we get to learn more about is using these best practices and implementing them so it still becomes as successful as it's meant to be. My 2 cents, really.
No, totally agree with you. And you know what? This brings me back to the first comment you make about when you talk to owners and look, dispute boards, those guards are becoming arbitrators. It's right there. It's something that we need to consider when we choose the right members for our dispute boards. That's so important, because when I say that they should be free to analyze whatever it's brought to them, should it be legal, should it be contractual, should it be technical? It's because they should be somehow brought to the discussion and help the parties solve the problem. They're there. They need to be, we need to use them. But of course, as my friend Augusto usually says, because sometimes we differ a little bit on this opinion, but what he says is the dispute, and this I agree with, dispute boards, they should protect the contract. Dispute board should protect the project. And it's one thing on its own, right? It's closed there in a little cluster. That's what they do. I mean, of course, if you see something that is bizarre and it's going against the law. So, all right, bring it in, folks. Let's discuss this. I will need to decide on this. But if it can, we can always make it prevail what the parties accorded, what's in the contract, what is in the project. We need to do this. It's the best for the project, right? It's like another friend of mine says that dispute boards is like a decompression valve. I love this expression. I love it because it's when the parties are like in huge friction and they are about to go to arbitration, or perhaps they just do not go to arbitration, but they keep, like, the contractor starts pacing. They start, advancing like a turtle, and the contractor, the owner retains payment, and then the project doesn't go well this way, man. So bring it to the guys. Let's see what the members say, and focus on the job, focus on the contract, and let the discussion be held within the dispute board. That's a decompression valve.
I like the analogy, and that's why it needs to be frequent, right?
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. We are finalizing the session. I would like to invite everyone to watch the record videos from the previous sessions. We have this is the 4th one. You have more 5 sessions in February, and the last one in March 1st. You may see them they are the YouTube. I try to put the link for the videos in the YouTube, where you could find this session probably tomorrow, I think, and the previous sessions you can watch them, and I think it's very interesting to watch them, because the ecosystem of the dispute board is very broad. We spoke about some points here, but there's other points that we may find insights in those previews. And I hope you attend the next ones. Let me see if I can say the days. The next one is February 8th, the February 15th, February 22, and March 1st. There are many different roles and parties of dispute boards, lessons from experience in Europe, in Latin America, sharing a dispute board meeting. So it's very interesting to watch those next sessions. And I would like to thank you very much for Ricardo and Gada to have this time to share the experience and research and found what they found in those research. And I think everybody will be glad to watch the next session. Thank you very much, Gada, Ricardo,
Thank you.
the
Thank you,
DBF,
Andre. Thank you,
DRBF,
Ricardo.
Kimberly, and thank you, everybody, and see you in the next session. Hope so.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
guys.
Thank you,
Pleasure being
Mike.
with you guys. Thank you.
Carpe diem, guys. Bye.